Welcome to Public Speaking with Peter George. Do you want to be calm, confident, and credible every time you speak in public? Then stay tuned as Peter and his guests discuss public speaking tips, techniques, and tactics that help you increase your impact, influence, and income. Here's your host, Peter George.
When it comes to any art or science, there are certain things that establish a foundation that you absolutely have to know. In this episode, Tyler Foley is going to share with you 5 insider tips that every speaker needs to know. Tyler has been acting in film and television since he was 6 years old and is an accomplished film and stage performer. He is also passionate about helping others confidently take the stage and impact an audience with their stories. He is currently the managing director of Total Buy-In and author of the #1 best-selling book, The Power to Speak Naked. Tyler brings an undeniable gravitas to the conferences and workshops he leads, feeling equally at home, whether among an intimate group or in front of a crowd of hundreds. With his distinct and direct style, Sean Tyler Foley is emerging as one of North America's sought-after leaders in the field of public speaking for personal and professional development. Welcome to the show, Tyler.
Oh, it's an absolute pleasure to be here, Peter.
Hey, there's no better place to start than the beginning. So let's discuss stage fright. Where does it come from, and how can our listeners get over it?
Well, so I'm going to unpack that question in reverse. The first way that they can get over stage fright is to recognize that they actually don't have stage fright. Everyone says that they're afraid of public speaking. And you and I are having a conversation right now, and although we're probably not physically near each other, we're still in public. We're discussing things. And I'm sure that every one of your listeners at some point right now has had a conversation in a group of friends or peers at a party or a social event or something. So we're not afraid of public speaking. What we're afraid of is public judgment. So we're usually afraid that the words that we're going to say are either received wrong or that we have some kind of complex around ourselves or what we're going to say where we don't trust in ourselves that we are the authority to be delivering that message. That usually happens when somebody is voluntold to give a presentation at a boardroom, or they have to give a speech at a wedding, or one of those typical social scenarios where people are thrust into the limelight and are therefore afraid to speak. And what they need to know is that if you've been asked to do one of those things, it's not because your friend or your boss or your spouse wanted to torture you. It's because they saw you as the authority. You were the person who needed to know. I work a lot with people who are giving speeches at weddings, right? Usually it's either the bridesmaid or the groomsman, and they've been asked to do the thing. They're like, oh, I don't even want to do this. And I'm like, well, why? Oh, because I'm terrified of being up on, I'm not funny and all the rest of the things that go with that. And I always ask them, I said, well, particularly bridesmaids, if you're maid of honor, who knows the bride better than you? Oh, nobody knows the bride better than me. We've been friends for the last 15 years, thick and thin, through elementary all the way through high school. And we did this. And I was the one who introduced her to her group. You get the story. I said, well, see, you know her better than anyone else. Just tell the story. That's all people need to know. Why are you happy that she's getting married? And then they usually light up and they talk, and all of a sudden they're having a conversation with me. And I said, okay, see, this conversation that you and I are having, you can have that with the audience. You're just telling them a story. Tell them your story. Tell them your point of view. Share with them your knowledge, because no one else can do it better than you, because no one else knows your story better than you. And by telling story, that's usually the easiest and fastest way to get over stage fright, because you can't get tripped up telling your own story. I can tell my story 1,000 different ways, 1,000 different times, and it'll always have the same theme. It may not be the same way, but nobody can fault me for it. They can't say, oh, that isn't how it happened. That's how it happened to me. It's my remembrance. So remembering that you're the authority, and especially if you're going into a boardroom, right? If somebody's asked you to present like sales figures or something like that, they've asked you for a reason. So go be the authority. But the other thing to remember is you don't always have to be speaking. There's a real interesting statistic that I read when it comes to audience engagement. And your audience is going to be more engaged if they're doing the speaking. As soon as you say it, you're like, oh yeah, no, that makes sense, right? Like if I'm answering questions, your audience is engaged because they have to think about a response. So if you get your audience to participate and provide input, the engagement goes up to 92%, where if it's just a monologue, if it's just me presenting data or speaking or doing a thing like that, the engagement is 78%. So you get a 14% boost just by asking questions. So if you're somebody who's in a boardroom and you don't want to do the talking, good news for you is you don't have to. You're the authority. You just need to guide the conversation. So if you're presenting information saying things like, so what do these numbers mean to you? Or is there something that sticks out in what I'm presenting? What does this chart show you? And then somebody will say, oh, well, I see that. And it looks like, we've had a 22% decrease from month to month in the last 3 months straight. And that has me terrified. Great. Why? Right. And then they can say, and so that was a really good point. And if you look at these numbers, what we need to do is to address them is do this. Now you're the authority who knows that. So you can add in your information, but by getting your audience to engage and guide the conversation, it's more relevant to them. It's more important. And then you forget to be afraid of speaking because you're just saying the things that you already know to be true. So the best way to get over stage fright is to remember you're not actually afraid of the stage. You're not afraid of the limelight. What you're afraid of is people are going to judge the things that you're saying. So say the things that you know to be true to your heart and elicit information from your audience, and it will take up probably 90% of the nerves.
I love that statistic about getting other people to be involved, how it shoots up so high. You mentioned storytelling. Why is it so powerful, and how can our listeners become more compelling storytellers?
Well, the reason it's such an effective tool and why storytelling is so important is because it universalizes us. If I tell my story, if I give you information about how something affected me or an experience that I went through, you naturally are going to sympathize with me. It puts you in my shoes. It allows me to communicate to you an idea from my point of view. And by doing that, you then take on my persona. You understand what my fears are, what my goals are, what my ambitions are, what my successes are. You can share in that experience with me because I've told you the story and I take you on that journey with me. So storytelling is an incredibly powerful way of getting an audience on your side. One of the things I talk about in my book is the thing you're the most afraid to say is very likely the thing that your audience needs to hear. Because by exposing yourself, by opening yourself up and being genuine and raw, I'm sure everybody has at least one moment where they went to a speech or a presentation and somebody said something that was just soul searching, where they revealed themselves in the most vulnerable and authentic way. And I guarantee every one of the audience members who are listening to this right now can think of that moment, can think of that time and how it impacted them. And it impacted them because we as humans have a natural want to be in sync with others. And when we're telling the story, we're all going to pattern after it. We're going to understand where somebody is. We're going to have sympathy. We're a naturally caring and loving people. And so by telling story, you get people on your side. And even if it isn't gut-wrenching, if you're in sales, you want to tell stories, right? That's how you get people on board to buy the thing that you want to buy, right? You tell them a story of how the product influenced you or a customer. You give the testimonials, right? Testimonials are so powerful, not because they brag about who you are, but they tell the story of how it impacted somebody. So story is universal. It binds us together. It allows you to communicate. Les Brown says it beautifully. He says, never make a point without a story, but never tell a story without a point. So this story brings you together, and the more specific you can get it, the more detailed, the more intricate you can make it, the more niche you can drill that story down. Believe it or not, the more universal it will communicate to an audience.
To Les's point, and I'm glad you brought that up, when I'm speaking with my clients, I always ask them when they're developing a story, before you go any further, what's the moral of the story? And if they can't tell me the moral of the story, I tell them that's an anecdote.
Yes.
You're just talking about something that happened, but there's no point.
And there can be multiple morals to the story. There can be multiple points. But make sure that when you're telling it, as you said, a story without a point is an anecdote. And I love that you said that. But a story with a point is how you land and have impact.
The working title of a book that I'm working on is It's All About the Audience. Tell me, how does one go about discerning their audience and determining their client avatar?
Well, so I have 2 patented methods for determining that. And they're so simple. You're going to laugh when you hear it because it's really not hard. And I know so many people I myself spent so much time trying to figure out who is my ideal client? What is it? And, I'd do the workshops with the avatars and I'd be pulling my hair out. And then one day, a really good speaker that I've worked with, Aaron Sky Kelly, said to me, your audience is you 5 years ago. And I went, come again? She says, your audience is you 5 years ago. And I started to think about that. Of course, that is who your audience is, because you want to be able to speak to you. When everybody always asks that question, if you could go back in time and tell yourself something, what would that advice be? That's your audience. If you're trying to figure out who you need to speak to, you need to speak to you 5 years ago. What were you struggling with 5 years ago or 10 years ago? What was the big obstacle that was in your way that you couldn't overcome? And what did you do to get around it? How did you overcome that barrier? What were the lessons that you needed to learn? And then you mount that together and you go and you tell your younger self, hey, look, younger self, if you were struggling with stage fright, if you didn't know how to find your audience, if you were trapped inside the everyman syndrome where you could talk about everything and anything, but you had no specifics, come talk to me. Because let me tell you, young man, I was there and I learned that you needed to get niche. You needed to get specific. You needed to understand that your audience is on your side before you ever take the stage. So there's no reason to fear them. You need to love them. You need to embrace that. Nerves are just a way of energizing you so that you can give your best to your audience. And I can give you all of those lessons because I've been there, my friend. I have been there. I have walked in those shoes. And that's how you find your audience. You just go and you speak to you. And if you speak to you again through story, it will become universal and they will gravitate to you. You will draw like a moth to the flame the people who need to be and hear your message. And by being authentically you, you'll be able to repel the people who don't need to be part of that. You will be able to very clearly define, this is who I'm speaking to, and the rest, take it or leave it. And so it's very powerful to just speak to yourself 5 years ago. The other thing I mentioned it, when you're being authentic, remember that authenticity is synonymous with self-awareness. So you can't speak to yourself 5 years ago in an authentic manner if you can't be raw and real with who you were then. What were your flaws? What are your flaws now? Nobody's perfect. I still struggle with aspects of public speaking, and I've been doing it for 35 years. It's why I continue to grow. Yeah, it's why I have people like Les Brown who can mentor me and show me and guide me, and work with people like Gail Kingsbury who can show me how to better take advantage of my skills, because there's still a lot to learn. I hope I never forget learning. I've learned something from you today, even, right? The story without a point is an anecdote. That's something that I'm going to write down. I'm going to take with me. So the one way to figure out who your avatar is, who were you 5 years ago? The next way, a little bit more complicated, but there's people who are like, well, I wouldn't even want to talk to me, right? So for me, I have that one avatar, and we'll call him young Tyler. My other avatar, we call Mary. And Mary is a charity director of a nonprofit who is doing a lot of good social work, but has a hard time both letting the community know what she's doing and has a really hard time communicating her message, both to solicit new funds into the charity and to try and get support, or to even be helpful to the people who she could help, because they don't even know that her charity that helps them is there. And the way that I discovered that avatar was breaking down who comes to me the most and asks for what advice. And when we looked at my client roster for the last 3 years and the people who I was getting the highest praise from, the best testimonials from, where I was making the most impact and good, it tended to be these female-centric charities with directors with great vision and great passion who just had a hard time taking the stage or taking on the limelight themselves. They felt that if the spotlight was on them, it was taking away from the work, and they wanted to highlight the work and highlight the work. And I said, well, you are the work. And so we worked with them to just really hone the message so that they could confidently take the stage, so that they were able to explain what their mission was, who they were helping, why it was important to them, what drove them to do this work. And as soon as people hear the why, they're always on board. And so the couple of charities that I've worked with have exponentially grown their value within the community, have gotten their donations in, are doing more work, are helping more people because they're able to communicate better, they're able to get their message out. And again, how I figured that avatar out was just who came to me the most, what were the main questions being asked, and what were the deliverables I was having to come up with over and over and over again. Who was I helping and how? And now I have my two avatars. I have me 5 years ago. How do I help myself? And I have the main client who is seeking me. What advice can I give to them? And those are the two quickest ways to figure out who your audience is.
I've never heard that before about speaking to yourself 5 years ago, and that being one of your audiences. To better serve our audiences, we need to engage them. How can a speaker deliver a more engaging presentation?
Well, so we've touched on a couple of the points already, but to reiterate, one of them is reiterate. Always bring back to mind some of the things that you discussed. So summing up things, bringing up key themes or points throughout, always triggers an audience to be reminded that is important information. Things like write this down, and there's subtle plays and words that you can use, phrases. I call them transition phrases. So write this down, and now we're going to cover, or to recap. All of these things are phrases that you can use to trigger your audience's mind to know that important information was just said. So now they have to think back to it, or important information is coming, or both. So that's one way you can do it. Another way is, again, tell story. Get people engaged through the story, and always start off the story with, well, not always, but if you want to get them to really embody the story, imagine this, or picture this, or think of a time when. Those are real trigger words for people to know that you want them to get inside of their head, and then you're going to guide that story and walk them through that so that they can personalize it. A really, really quick way to, if you see your audience is starting to drift and you need to bring them back and engage them, again, with that 78 to 92% engagement difference between a monologue and a dialogue, it's not always appropriate to ask the audience questions or solicit input directly from the audience. But you as a speaker may need a break, or you may need to reset the tone of the room. So anyone at any time, no matter what you're presenting, can always use the following phrase. Now turn to your partner and tell them one key takeaway that you've gotten so far. You do that at any point. It doesn't matter what it is. If it's a sales presentation, if it's a motivational speech, if it's a keynote talk, if it's an educational presentation, whatever, if you're up front, even the bridesmaid speech, you can use this tip. Now, what's one thing that you've taken away so far? And turn to somebody and ask, right? And everybody looks to the person beside them and they say, well, this is the one thing that I have. It's a really powerful exercise for a couple of reasons. First of all, it forces your audience to think about, to them, what is the thing now that I've taken away? And they will come up with something. So now you've already reestablished your authority because they've learned something from you. But the other thing is when they share it with somebody, now they're reinforcing your message to someone else. And it creates the repetition that creates the engagement. So I may say to you, Peter, the biggest takeaway that I got from this is that a story without a point is just an anecdote. And then you say, yes. And for me, the biggest takeaway so far was that my ideal audience member is me 5 years ago. Now I've reinforced 2 points. So I may have forgotten the one because I was concentrated on the other. And I go, oh yeah, no, that is. And it starts the dialogue between the 2 people. Meanwhile, you're sitting there having a sip of water, enjoying your thoughts, recomposing, looking at your notes, trying to figure out how you're going to get back. Then you say, okay. And then you, if you want to get super pro, say, okay, could I get 2 examples? 2 examples of what you have learned so far. And the one person will stand up and say, oh, I really like the audience engagement, that if we get people talking, that it goes up to 92%. Yeah, no, that's an excellent statistic. And then you have somebody else come up and they say, oh, and I really, really enjoyed this idea. And now everybody has heard at least 2 things. They may have heard 3 and may have even heard 4 new ideas to them that you've already presented. They're reestablishing your authority. They've gotten up, they've moved, they've at least moved within their seat. So they've gotten some oxygenation going. They've talked. So now they're engaged. Their brain is back thinking. And now you just go back into your business. And it's a really, really powerful technique to use to get people to engage back into what you're saying.
Do you think it also gives them a repeatable phrase? So they leave the presentation and someone says, hey, I wasn't able to be there. What was it about?
Yeah. And it's those points when people are reaffirming what you've already said. Those are usually the ones that people write down in their notebook. Like the people who like to take notes, those are the ones, because they're the key phrases, as you mentioned, that stand out. You know, for me, I'm always spouting out authenticity is synonymous with self-awareness. You know, I'll get people to write that down constantly. The other one is, the thing that you're afraid to say is the thing that your audience needs to hear. I will always, always, always. It doesn't matter if my presentation is 5 minutes or 40 minutes. At some point, that's going to be worked into a presentation. So by having people repeat that phrase for you, it halves or quarters your workload.
For any of this to work, you have to get more speaking gigs. One of the best ways to do that, of course, is networking, or actually more accurate, effective networking. How can our listeners be better networkers?
Oh, so the first thing you need to remember is when I was talking about storytelling and I said get niche, I do mean get niche, get very specific, get very targeted with who your target audience is. And don't feel that every time you go to a networking event that you're going to find your ideal client. That should not be your focus or your goal when you go to a networking event. Anytime you go to a networking event, instead of sitting in your car doing the network prayer, which we've all done, dear higher power, under no circumstance let this be a waste of my time. Please, please, please let me find at least one decent human being who will take my card and accept my services in a way that I need. And please don't let me be inundated by 1,000 sales pitches of things that I don't need. We've all made that talk to ourselves in a car.
I love that.
What you need to do is adopt the mindset when you go into a networking is, let me find at least 10 people in this room who will be valuable and aligned partners that I can strategically and powerfully align myself with so that we can grow our businesses together. Because that is the point of networking, strategic alliances. And if you go into a networking event with the understanding that you are looking for strategic partners in the growth of your business, then you start to look at that networking event a little bit differently. So instead of pitching, this is what I do. Hey, my name is Tyler Foley. I'm a speaker coach. Do you need to get on stages? Hey, my name is Tyler Foley. I'm a speaker coach. Do you want to get on stages? I can go, hey, Peter, my name is Tyler Foley. I'm a speaker coach. How can I be of service to you? And you can say, well, I don't need speaker coaches. I'm a speaker myself. I do it all the time. I say, great. So what do you need? What would be the one, if I could wave a magic wand right now, what's the one thing you need to propel your business forward? And then you tell me. Now, I may have that service in my toolbox. And I can say, oh, well, funny that you mentioned that. I do this. But if you don't, I can say, great. I have a very large network. Can I get your card? And if I know anybody who does that thing that you need, I will put you in touch with them. Is that okay? And you go, yes. And then I take your card and I write down on the back of it that Peter is looking for X. Then I start networking through the group. And I might actually find somebody. So, oh, my name's Tyler Foley. I'm a speaker coach. What do you do and how can I be of service? And they go, oh, well, I am X and I do this and I'm looking for clients right now because, economy's low and I really need to bolster my thing. And I go, oh, you do X. Peter's looking for X. So then I do the warm introduction. Now, I have now solved your problem, Peter, and I've solved the other person's problem. And I did nothing but facilitate an introduction. But both of you will remember that I was the one that solved the problem. And it wasn't with my service. It was just by opening up my network. And that is truly when everybody says, your net worth is your network. They don't mean to constantly spam on LinkedIn and try to sell your product to them. What they mean is that your network is who will directly refer to you, but you need to give to receive. And the more you are introducing people outside of your network to each other, and bringing them into your network, A, the larger your network grows, and B, the more valuable you become. Because if you're the nexus, if you're the epicenter of all of that happening, people will remember you. So when you are networking, you say, so when people say, well, now what can I do for you? I'm looking for stages. If you know anybody if you are or know somebody who is looking to have somebody come in to facilitate better presentations so that your team don't get glazed over every time one of you has to come up and speak, please introduce them to me, because I would love to come in and show people how to be more engaging when they're presenting. And that's it. You leave it at there. And the number of stages that I've gotten from just that one little trick, who I learned it from Bernie Dorman, the late, great Bernie Dorman at CEO Space. And I don't even know how to calculate the impact that it had. If I had to give a rough number, probably 20 time ROI easily. But I don't know, because I don't even know where I was at before. And I don't know the compound effect of how much that reach has gone. But I do know that everybody knows if they need something to come to me first. Because if I can't solve it myself, I know somebody who can. And that's the true value of networking.
Build that resource. Use it strategically as opposed to going in haphazardly. And a lot of people go in, they get a drink, they stand next to the shrimp bowl. When the shrimp's gone, they go home.
Yeah. Or they just carpet bomb with the business cards, right? And then the worst is when you've done that, and then you walk out to the parking lot to your vehicle, and you see all of your cards lying around because everybody's just kind of throwing them on the side into the garbage. It's just deflating feeling.
And what do people say after they do that? Networking doesn't work.
Exactly. And if you network like that, I would agree 1,000%. Networking doesn't work and will never work for you.
Now, hopefully the glass of wine was a good one.
Exactly. And you enjoyed your dinner because you probably paid for it. But if you go in, again, looking for those strategic partners, strategic alliances to grow your business, you're going to be so much further ahead.
Tyler, this time has flown by. I really enjoyed it. Before we go, how can our listeners learn more about you and the services you provide?
It's real simple. They can go to SeanTylerFoley.com, and it's spelled the proper Irish way, SeanTylerFoley.com, SeanTylerFoley.com, and they can sign up for the newsletter. Anybody who's listening to this right now, if they want to, on the upper right-hand corner of the webpage, we have the method. It's a free 11-page download. It contains essentially 5 insider tips that I have strategically put together for your listeners, compresses 35 years of public speaking knowledge into simple, actionable steps. It's free, and I hope that they enjoy it. And best way, SeanTylerFoley.com.
It's been a pleasure to have you with us today.
Oh, it's my joy, Peter. We'll talk to you soon.
That's a wrap of another episode of Public Speaking with Peter George. Be sure to rate, review, and subscribe wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. Tune in Monday when you'll hear another episode of Public Speaking with Peter George, and again Thursday for your next episode of Quick Bites, public speaking tips and techniques you can digest in 5 minutes or less. Until next time, remember, when it comes to speaking in public, you've got this.